We're going to start with the basics. What even is a choke point? Then we'll dive into two massive case studies, Hormuz and Malacca. After that, we'll see what happens when things go wrong, the global ripple effect, and finally, we'll look at the wild search for a way around them.
Okay, let's get right into it. Before we start talking about crises and blockades, we need to get a really solid handle on what we're actually talking about, these critical arteries of the world. So, to put it simply, a maritime choke point is just a narrow waterway where a ton of global sea traffic has to squeeze through. You gotta think of them as more than just shortcuts. They are the absolute vital arteries of global trade. A blockage here isn't just some little shipping delay, no, it's a potential global economic meltdown that can threaten energy security and bring supply chains to a screeching halt.
Now, what's really wild when you look at a map like this is just how few of these points there actually are. I mean, look at it. You've got Hormuz, Malacca, the Suez Canal, Bab el-Mandeb. It's just a handful of passages that are basically the arteries and veins of the whole global economy. Almost every drop of seaborne oil has to pass through at least one of these to get where it's going.
Okay, let's kick things off with our first case study, the Strait of Hormuz. We can call this the world's energy artery. And to really get what's at stake here, we're going to run through a super plausible crisis scenario. Think of it like a geopolitical stress test, just to see how fast everything can fall apart when this one artery gets clogged.
This number, it is just staggering. Every single day, something like 20 million barrels of oil and petroleum products pass through the Strait of Hormuz. That's about 1/5 of what the entire world uses in a day. The scale is so big it's almost hard to wrap your head around, which is exactly why any little disruption here sends these massive shockwaves through the market instantly.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. See, a choke point isn't just a dot on a map, it's a massive lever of power. Any country that controls one of these can literally weaponize geography. They can turn a commercial highway into a tool of economic warfare, basically holding global trade hostage.
So let's game this out. Just imagine this scenario unfolding. It's, say, March 2026. A regional conflict kicks off and Iran closes the strait. The impact? It's immediate. Oil prices rocket past $100 a barrel. But it's not just that. Tanker traffic slows to a crawl, not because of a physical blockade yet, but because insurance costs go through the roof. Then, boom, it escalates. Gunboats fire on a vessel, and just like that, passage stops. The artery is now completely blocked.
Okay, so that's the kind of acute, military-style shock that a choke point like Hormuz can deliver. But here's the thing, not all threats look the same. Let's shift our focus east to our second case study, which gives us a totally different kind of risk. If Hormuz is the energy artery, then the Strait of Malacca, well, that's the global trade spine. It's the superhighway for everything else.
So let's really compare these two. Hormuz is all about energy, right? 1/5 of the world's oil and gas. A crisis there means an immediate shock at the pump. Malacca, on the other hand, is about pure volume and variety. It handles a mind-blowing 40% of all global trade. We're talking everything from oil to cars to the semiconductors that are in the phone you're probably holding. A problem there doesn't just raise gas prices, it shuts down factories all over the world. But the threats in Malacca are totally different. It's less about a government shutting the whole thing down and way more about this constant, low-level crime. As you can see from the data here, piracy and armed robbery incidents shot up in 2025, to a 19-year high, in fact. This just shows a whole different kind of vulnerability.
Now, when you hear piracy, don't go picturing some Hollywood movie. The reality here is a lot more like a bunch of opportunistic smash and grabs. You've got small groups, they operate at night, and they target ships that are moving slowly. They aren't after hostages or anything dramatic. They're stealing engine parts and scrap metal. It's this persistent, grinding threat, not a big military blockade.
So we have these two very different choke points, facing very different threats. But what happens when one of them actually gets disrupted? Well, the consequences are never just contained to one area. They ripple out across the entire globe.
Yeah, it's a pretty predictable and really damaging chain reaction. First, the choke point gets blocked. Ships have no other choice but to reroute, and we're talking thousands of miles around entire continents like Africa. Obviously, that adds a huge amount of time to the journey, and then, bam, shipping rates and insurance premiums just explode.
And to make that real for you, look at this number. A ship going from the Persian Gulf to Rotterdam in Europe, that journey would normally take about 19 days. But if Hormuz and the Suez Canal are out of commission, that same journey around Africa suddenly takes 34 days. That's an extra 15 days of fuel, crew costs, and delays for every single ship.
Now, this is a really important point to get. A strait doesn't have to be physically blockaded with warships for it to be, for all intents and purposes, closed. The second a region gets declared a high-risk zone, those war risk insurance premiums can get so expensive that it's just not profitable to sail there anymore. So insurance, in a way, becomes the market's method of enforcing a closure long before a single shot is ever fired.
So all this extreme vulnerability leads to a really fascinating question. Can we just engineer our way out of geography? Can we build our way around these problems? This brings us to the global hunt for bypasses.
When it comes to Hormuz, there are basically two big ideas on the table. The first is engineering. Just build out existing pipelines through Saudi Arabia and the UAE to get oil to other ports. The second is geopolitical. These really ambitious plans to bring Syria back online as an energy hub, fixing old pipelines to the Mediterranean. The big challenge? Well, pipelines can still be attacked, and those political projects depend on a level of stability in the region that, let's be honest, just isn't there right now.
And the plans to get around Malacca are just as big. You've got Thailand's proposed Kra Land Bridge, a massive project to build a rail and road corridor to literally carry goods across the land, letting ships skip the long trip through the strait and saving days of travel. Meanwhile, you have China pouring money into its Belt and Road projects, like the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is really an attempt to fundamentally redraw the map and make China less dependent on that single point of failure at sea.
But look, building a bypass isn't some kind of magic bullet. This table really sums up the trade-offs perfectly. On one hand, yeah, you're less dependent on one spot, and you can create new economic opportunities. But the downsides are massive. These projects cost tens of billions of dollars, they take forever to build, they depend on shaky international agreements, and at the end of the day, a pipeline on land can be just as vulnerable as a ship at sea.